All right, today we are going to find out if vibe coding is the future. Let's dive in.
It's like somebody dropped some giant beanstalk seeds at night. We woke up in the morning and there it is. Like, whoa,
What's going on? I mean, I think our sense right now is this isn't a fad. This isn't going away. This is actually the dominant way to code. And if you're not doing it, like, you might just be left behind.
There better be context. Okay, let's just keep watching. I'm going to watch just for a little bit, and then I'll give my thoughts later. I'm really going to try to be charitable with this video. Believe it or not, I actually am going to try to be charitable. I just want to throw that out there.
Welcome back to another episode of The Light Cone. I'm Gary. This is Jared, Harj, and Diana, and we're partners at Y Combinator. Collectively, we've funded companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars right when it was just an idea and a few people. So today we're talking about vibe coding, which is from a Andre Karpathy post that went viral recently. There's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists.
Yeah, so we surveyed the founders in the current YC batch to get their take on vibe coding. And we essentially asked them a bunch of questions. We asked them, what tools are you using? How has your workflows changed? And sort of generally, where do you think the future of software engineering is going, and how will the role of software engineer change as we get into a world of vibe coding? And we got some pretty interesting responses. Anyone have any favorite quotes that jumped out from the founders?
I think one of them that I can read verbatim is, I think the role of software engineer will transition to product engineer. Human taste is now more important than ever as code and tools make everyone a 10x engineer.
Human taste? What does that mean? I think this is more of like a people or like a user-centered developer. Is that what's being implied here? Because I do think that software engineering has shifted more towards being a user-centered developer and caring a lot more about the user experience and putting themselves in the shoes of the user experience. I think that has been emphasized more. So maybe that's what's being implied by product engineer. But everyone tosses engineer on so many different positions, where like the term engineer is, maybe that's the goal, to completely destroy what an engineer actually means. But I wonder if there's different interpretations of like a product engineer, like if you ask a bunch of different people. But yeah, I just want to say, like, I think user-centered development is definitely a priority in software engineering now. So again, try to be charitable.
That's from the founder of Outlet.
I got one. Abi from Astra said, I don't write code much. I just think and review. This is like a super technical founder.
Okay, I'm glad I got that context. A very technical founder just stated and admitted he doesn't write code much. He just reviews. Are we talking about software engineers that actually like writing code, or are we talking about maybe like CTOs, VPs of engineering or like more senior people who have shifted much more towards like a leadership role with a bunch of meetings, who just don't write a lot of code? Because that shift does happen to a lot of senior people who don't really want to double down and dive deeper into more of a technical senior role. So there are different types of senior software engineers. But when we hear like a technical founder, very technical, what does that even mean? Because that might even mean that they really didn't spend a lot of time coding in the first place. There's a lot of highly technical people that aren't software engineers.
Founder whose like last company was also a DevTools company. He's like extremely able to code. And so it's fascinating to have people like that saying things like this.
There's another quote from a different RB from Copycat, who said I am far less attached to my code now, so my decisions on whether we decide to scrap or refactor code are less biased. Since I can code 3 times as fast, it's easy for me to scrap and rewrite if I need to.
And then I guess the really cool thing about this stuff is it actually parallelizes really well. So Yoav from K60, he says, I write everything with cursor. Sometimes I even have 2 windows of cursor open in parallel, and I prompt them on 2 different features. Which makes sense. Why not 3? You know, you
Exactly.
could do a lot, actually.
And I think another one that's great is from the founder of Train Loop. He mentions how coding has changed 6 to 1 month ago. 10x speed up 1 month ago to now is 100x speed up, exponential acceleration.
And he says, I'm no longer an engineer. I'm a product person.
You were never an engineer. No legitimate engineer is admitting that, and I'm guessing the implication is AI, that AI is causing a 10x or 100x speed up of being able to build quality software. No software engineer is saying this.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think like that might be something that's happening broadly. You know, it really ends up being 2 different roles you need. I mean, it actually maps to how engineers sort of self-assign today, in that either you're, you know, front end or back end, and then back end ends up being about actually infrastructure, and then front end is so much more actually being a PM. You're sort of almost being like an ethnographer going into the obscure, underserved parts of the pie of GDP, and you're trying to extract out, like, this is what those people in that GDP pie actually want, and then I'm going to, you know, turn that into code, and then actually evals are the most important part of that.
When I was running Triple Byte, this was actually one of the things we noticed. It was almost as important as the technical assessment of engineers when trying to figure out who's a good match for a specific company. Is there's a certain threshold of technical ability you need, but beyond that, it was, do you actually want to talk to users or not? Like, some engineers are actually just a lot more motivated by working on things where they know who the users are and they get to like communicate with them and they get live feedback and they can iterate, and essentially being a product engineer. And other engineers really don't want to do that at all. Like, they find it annoying having to deal with users, and they want to just like work on like hard technical problems and refactor
That's a
code.
back-end engineer.
Yeah, that's what we call a back-end engineer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think a lot of companies hire front-end developers based off of whether they want to talk to the user. But I do agree that if you care about the users and you buy into the product and what you're building, there's going to be a higher chance of longevity at that company, on that team, in that dev position. But I don't think you really need to talk to the user in order to do that. You know, sometimes you just get feedback and support tickets, and you get metrics, you get analytics, you get Hotjar recordings. You like, there's so much data to be able to read where I don't think you're necessarily talking to the user, and that's not necessarily what companies are looking for. But you need to care about the user experience. So I pretty much agree with everything there.
Yeah, sure. And that's only a theme that came up in these survey responses, right? This idea of sort of the LLMs are maybe going to push people to choose, because the actual writing of the code may become less important. And it's about, do you have taste and you want to solve product problems, or are you an architect and you want to solve systems problems?
Oh, and interestingly, I guess...
Do you have taste and you want to solve product? I think sometimes you get product people who just come off as like snobby, and they are the ones that truly care about users. They are the ones who like have the creativity and the vision to like really care about their craft, where software engineers they only really care about hard technical problems. They care about building the best algorithm, right? But software engineering is a craft, and you are able to creatively, or you're able to express your creativity through the way that you structure code and make things more efficient and look good and readable, and you just feel good with how it's organized. Like, I guess that kind of has to do with system architecture, but the way that product seems to talk about software engineers, it feels like they see software engineering as just like building the next hard, or like just like optimizing the algorithm to process the data faster. I feel like when product talks about software engineering in general, that's kind of what seems to be implied, when I do think there is a creative expression in software engineering that product does not tend to highlight too well. It's like either you are talking to the users and you are planning out the product, or you are solving a very hard algorithm challenge. And I think there's so much nuance in between that if you are a software engineer, it feels like a creative endeavor in the way that you do build out your code. So maybe that's not what this person is playing, but every time I hear product like separate software engineering and product, it seems like nuance is dropped in the middle. And I really want to stress, like, there is creative expression in software engineering, and you can feel that. If you've been a software engineer for a while, you can feel that, and it feels good. So I just wanted to state that.
One thing the survey did indicate is that this stuff is terrible at debugging.
Yeah.
And so the humans have to do the debugging still. They have to figure out, well, what is the code actually doing? Here's a bug. Spot the bug. Where's the code path that, we have some, logic error, just didn't figure this out, right? There doesn't seem to be a way to just tell it debug. You were saying that you have to be very explicit, like as if giving instructions to a first-time software engineer.
I have to really spoon feed it the instructions to get it to debug stuff, or you can kind of embrace the vibes. I'd say Andre Karpathy style is just like ignore the bug and just like re-roll, just like tell it to try again from scratch. Like it's wild how your coding style changes.
This is what vibe coding is. I watched several vibe coders do live streams, and they were way less happier at the end of their stream than in the beginning of their stream. I'm just going to leave it at that.
When actually writing the code becomes 1,000x cheaper. Like, as a human, you would never just like blow away something that you'd worked on for a long time and rewrite it from scratch because you had a bug. You'd always fix the bug. But like for the LLM, if it can just like rewrite 1,000 lines of code in like 6 seconds, like,
it doesn't cost anything.
Why not?
That's kind of like writing, taking the approach of how people use Midjourney or Playground when you're trying to generate images. Like if there are artifacts or things that I don't like, sometimes I don't even change the prompt. I just click re-roll, and I do that 5 times, and sometimes it just works. I'm just like, oh, I can use that now.
Yeah.
Which is very different.
No software engineer is saying this. And I think this is a difference between product and sometimes even indie hackers and actually people who enjoy coding, who enjoy software engineering. This isn't enjoyable when you get true fulfillment through solving problems through code. You're stripping out all of those aha moments for cheap aha moments where an LLM is basically doing your job for you. You didn't really have to earn that. And you get cheap dopamine hits. You might as well just like scroll through TikTok if you want the same dopamine hits.
And frame of building systems, because you're not building foundationally step by step. You're really doing it from scratch, because fundamentally what's going on is like all these tools today are coming from the world of generated code that are in this latent space hidden somewhere, and you have to do it from scratch to find like a different gradient and not get stuck. And then you want to like add a bit of randomness, get it to regenerate. But I do think maybe, I don't know, whatever next generation of O5, maybe we'll get to the point that actually is able to build upon. I mean, as of right now, I think most of it is you need to re-roll and rewrite, but it doesn't build upon it yet. But we haven't seen any of the coding tools right now work well with reasoning. I think we have.
Well, O3 is infinitely better at debugging than 3.5 Sonnet. So like it definitely feels like we're headed in the direction where this may not be true in 6 months, the next time we do this episode. Diana, do you want to talk about like the models that people are using and the IDEs that the people are using? There's some really interesting trends there.
Yeah, I think as we mentioned a couple episodes ago, we already saw this in the shift started happening. The vibe started to shift back in summer 24 when Cursor was being used by a big portion of the batch. And now, by far, is the leader. But the other thing that's happening, this is a very fast and moving environment. Windsurf is a fast follower. It's starting to be a very good product as opposed to Cursor. And I think, Jared, you have some first experience with why Windsurf is like better than Cursor.
Yeah, I think the number.
I don't care about that. I think a bunch of people from the Y Combinator batch they're just a bunch of product people. They're just a bunch of entrepreneurs. These aren't people who care to be good software engineers and get better at software engineering. They're people who care to push out a product, which I totally get. I completely understand the purpose or like what indie hackers get out of being an indie hacker. They're looking to push out products. It's not even really kind of like a software engineering venture. It just isn't. They're two very different things. And if you find people are trying to substitute their coding with less coding, then they don't really care to be software engineers. And this is okay, but I think sometimes we mix this idea that it's going to replace all software engineers. No, like software engineers that are really good at what they do, they like software engineering. You start taking that away from them, they're going to leave, right? Like there's enjoyment, there's a lot of those aha moments and this fulfillment that comes with spending, days working on a really, really tough feature and getting stuck and overcoming that. Again, we're replacing it with cheap dopamine hits, which is fine if you don't care about software engineering. If you care about the product, you don't need this fulfillment with coding. But that doesn't mean it's going to replace software engineers with this type of coding. It's just not. I think we're kind of just splitting between two different purposes, two different types of people. And I think what's going to happen, what I see happening, is a bunch of shitty code is being created to test an idea, and then software engineers are going to be hired to fix a lot of the spaghetti code, organize it, and make it a little bit more scalable as you build your team around a product that has been tested in the market. But why are you using code to do this? Why are you using LLMs to re-roll and create a brand new product over and over and over and over again when a lot of your low-code solutions have existed already to do this? You can deliver prototypes with little code to test a market out. You can do all of this already. Why are you making your market fit more complicated by having LLMs create shitty-ass code for you?
Number one reason that people are switching is that Cursor today largely needs to be told what files to look at in your code base. So if you have a large code base, you can tell what to do, but you have to tell it like where to look in the code base. Windsurf indexes your whole code base and is pretty good at figuring out what files to look at on its own. There's other differences too, but I think that's the most important one at the moment. Notable,
Devin does get mentioned, but the drawback of Devin not really being used for serious features is that it doesn't really understand the code base. Is being used mostly for small features and barely mentioned. The other one, people still use ChatGPT, and the reason they use it is because they want to actually use the reasoning models. So it does get posted. People post some of the debugging questions to figure out use the more powerful models for reasoning. Because right now, Cursor, Windsurf are still in the old world. I mean, old world less than 6 months ago of pre-reasoning models, not in the test time compute. So founders are using that. And there's some founders, some of them are self-hosted as well, self-hosting models, because maybe they have more critical, sensitive IP. They do that. And now talking about the shifts in terms of models, the thing about CodeGen, the big game in town that we saw 6 months ago was Claude Sonnet 3.5. It's still actually a big contender. Most are still using it, but O1, O1 Pro, and O3 Meaning, all these reasoning models are starting to see, it's almost like getting neck to neck now close with Sonnet 3.5. The other one is 4.0, virtually no use for CodeGen. And the other interesting thing is DeepSeek R1 is getting mentioned. Is been used. It's like a viable contender as well. And Gemini, not really mentioned.
The one thing I've heard from Gemini is because it has like the longest context window, I've heard from a couple of founders that they do use it, and the way that they use it is they put their entire code base into the Gemini context window, and they just like tell it to like fix a bug. And it doesn't always work, but like sometimes it can just like one shot fix stuff because it is the whole thing in the context window.
It will be interesting to see as people get more.
But what other bugs does it create when it does that? How do you... that you might not know about if you don't really understand? Like, is it a code base that was already generated, like has a lot of AI generated code? I feel like there's just this exponential deep dive off the cliff as you introduce more and more AI generated code if you don't truly take the time to flesh out a lot of these features yourself and understand what's happening in the code base. You're going to lose context when you're not diving deep into the code base and changing stuff. That gets reinforced, and it like your understanding of the code base gets reinforced. And as that code base scales and you're just introducing a bunch of AI generated code, I think you're going to lose a lot of context, and you're going to forget things that are happening in your code base. And you're going to, I just think, again, it's just like you're just diving off the cliff at that point, and you're hoping for the best. If you are maybe stuck on a bug that maybe your engineers have been stuck on for a while, or you're gonna need engineers to take a look at the code that are familiar with the code base. I can see it being a little bit of an assistance, but if I'm thinking like they're talking about their Y Combinators doing this and just getting a feel for the vibe of the Y Combinator founders doing this, just kind of like the way they're describing them makes it seem like as much as possible they're leaning on AI generated code. And it's not like they're like really hands-on with a lot of their code base. They're probably going to try to outsource as much of that to LLMs as possible. I think it's going to get really bad really quickly. And I can see a bunch of bugs being introduced. That's just going to be kind of just like a ticking time bomb.
More adoption on the newly released reasoning models with Flashback 2.0. I don't think people have tried it yet. But the long context window plus reasoning could be a good contender. What is the estimated code that's being written by LLMs in the current Badger?
Hi, this is pretty crazy. So we explicitly asked this question: what % of your code base do you estimate is AI generated? The way I interpret the question is like, like of the actual characters in your code base, not including any libraries that you imported, like a percentage of like the characters were like typed by human hands versus like emitted by an LLM. And the crazy thing is 1/4 of the founders said that more than 95% of their code base was AI generated.
That surprises me. I thought it'd be more founders. 25% is still a lot to basically not want to write code at all. That's what that percentage is. They don't care to write code.
Which is like an insane statistic.
Again, low-code solutions can solve a lot of these founders' problems.
And it's not like we funded a bunch of non-technical founders. Like every one of these people is like highly technical, completely capable of building.
Define highly technical. Because again, we're describing highly technical people, but are we describing software engineers that actually like software engineering?
Their own product from scratch. A year ago, they would have built their own product from scratch, but now 95% of it is built by an AI.
Except for, maybe it sounds like we have one or two examples of
that's
people.
true.
And again, even if they could kind of scrap together a product, I've seen a lot of indie hackers, they don't really care to build a solid foundation in software engineering. They just make it work. It's spaghetti code.
Yeah.
who they're so young that
Yeah.
they learned to code in the last 2 years. So they actually don't know a world where
Yeah.
Cursor didn't exist.
Yeah. This is one of my best companies.
Again, fresh people that don't really know anything.
This batch actually is exactly this. The founders are extremely technical minds, but they're not classically trained in computer science and programming. And they are incredibly productive and able to produce just a ton of like really amazing product. And AI is writing almost the entire thing.
It kind of makes me think a lot of the discourse around sort of Gen Zs are the first digital native that grew up with the internet. This is like the generation that grew up with native AI coding tools, that they skip the classical training of a software engineer and they just do it with the vibe. But they are actually very technical minded. I mean, they have degrees in math and physics.
Yeah. Exactly.
So they have that raw, let's call it more like system thinking type of mind that you still need. Maybe we should talk a bit about that. It's like, what's still the same and what has changed?
I think this vibe coding will enable people who have those kinds of technical minds, who come from other technical disciplines like math and physics, to become highly productive as programmers much faster than it was in the past. Like I remember there were like coding boot camps, like back in the day, they would try to like retrain physics people into programmers. And then like it didn't work that well because it just takes too long to learn all of the syntax and all of the libraries and all the stuff that you have to know.
So I've reviewed a lot of coding boot camps, and I'm going to officially state this. I think coding boot camps were a mistake. And they created a lot of really bad software engineers. And my hope was that a lot of these graduates would go out and like really build a solid foundation for themselves, and a lot of them got laid off. There are still coding bootcamp grads that did spend time getting good with software engineering, or they weren't laid off and their company continued to kind of like, you know, they're just doing well. They're in an industry and the app has a good market fit. It's just doing well. But there are a lot of coding bootcamp grads, like a lot of coding bootcamp grads that just never got better. And they got by because companies were desperate at a certain point to hire. And I think that's what's going to happen with a lot of people leaning too heavily on AI. They're just, again, further separated from building a solid foundation of just software engineering and computer science fundamentals. And I think the problem is going to be worse. We're going to have even worse software engineers going out into the field who just can't code. So this is going to be worse than coding boot camps.
To know to be really productive, but like now it's a new world.
The coding bootcamps are also very specifically focused on getting you hired at companies. And I think it was around like 2015 era where just companies themselves were rethinking how to evaluate software engineers in their hiring processes. And it was moving, there was a real shift away from like, we want to hire classically trained computer scientists, whiteboard algorithmic problems, towards we actually want people who are just really productive and write code quickly. And some of these arguments are like evergreen eternal, right? Like I remember.
And how's that going right now?
When Rails first came out, there was just like a real sense of, active record as a way to like interact with your database was seen as a great abstraction, but like there was still this same flavor of argument, right? Like, like if you don't really understand the internals, like you're just going to write like crappy, low performant web software.
How do you feel those arguments have aged if you look back on it now?
My feeling is that many of the most successful companies, I would say Stripe, Gusto are just two that really spring to my mind as ones that really heavily leaned into the actually, we just want people who are really productive with the tools, and we're going to change our whole hiring process to just select for people who are good at, like, the interview shifted from teach us how you think to you've got 3 hours on a laptop and you need to build a to-do list app and build it as quickly as you can. And those companies have had a tremendous amount of success. It does seem like at some point as they grew and they scaled, then the bottleneck did actually become having people who are classically trained and systems thinkers to sort of scale up and architect things.
It does seem like how people are hiring engineers is changing, but maybe not changing fast enough yet. The results of this survey are relatively surprising to the four of us here. They're probably pretty shocking out there. Even it's just like this thing that popped up in our backyard only in the last 6 to 9 months. My guess would be engineering hiring period has not actually caught up to this. People are still standing at whiteboards and doing that kind of thing, as opposed to what can you get done. And so
because things like coding boot camps have produced a lot of really shitty developers.
it sounds like the Stripes of the world, they were ahead of the game, and everyone has to.
By the way, that's self-taught developers too. There are a lot of really shitty self-taught developers who don't care to get really good at software engineering and dive deep and spend a significant amount of time with fundamentals. Companies are laying off a lot of these people who don't really care and then haven't really deepened their knowledge and built that solid foundation. I don't think companies want to hire people without a solid foundation anymore.
Hire engineers this way now.
I mean, I wonder if actually even that's going to be sort of the old meta. I mean, something that stood out from the survey responses was this idea of two themes we talked about, right? Like one is how, okay, we're all just product people now. Like actually the thing that you need is really great taste and understand what to build. And the second was
Is that the video? It's a weird sound.
of actually now what's really valuable is to be like a systems thinker and an architect and to really sort of understand the bigger picture, in which case actually like maybe being a really productive coder, because that's definitely something that always fit my definition of when you're talking about who are great engineers, you know, and like one of the dimensions are they're just really like they can write code really fast.
Yes.
Like maybe that's outdated. Like maybe that's not, if the LLMs are actually really good at writing code quickly.
Right.
And to your point, like now it's actually just cheaper to like reroll and just like write everything from scratch than try and debug. Like the skills might just be completely different.
Problem is there's like two different stages. There's 0 to 1, in which case speed is the only thing that matters. And then to your point about active record and Rails, that battle was actually fought to a standstill because of course using active record or Rails allowed you to go from 0 to 1 very quickly. But then what happened at Twitter? It became the fail whale, right?
Yeah.
Like basically once you get to 1, like one, that architecture will not get you to a billion or 10 billion or $100 billion in valuation or users or whatever. Like it's just not going to actually work. So I think you're going to see the same thing. And then there's nuance in what you just said, right? Like getting 0 to 1 quickly and then being able to scale to 1 billion users are two totally different sets. And then I think that might be irreplaceable for now around people. And one of the things I discovered as we were scaling one of the biggest Rails sites, I mean, you scaled one of the biggest Rails sites too, is that there aren't that many people who have to do it. Getting to 1 is so rare.
Yeah, that's true.
That did you reach this point where how you got to 0 to 1 very quickly was like you used lots and lots of open source, and then at some point, like maybe 2 years into this, maybe 1.5 years into the startup, even we could not use random gems anymore.
Gems anymore because they were just never designed for companies at our scale,
like,
and so we had to
deploy it and it fall over.
Our own stuff. Yeah,
it would just fall over, right?
Actually, this very good example is what you're saying, Gary. I think maybe to summarize a bit more. 0 to 1 will be great for vibe coding where founders can ship features very quickly. But once they hit product market fit, they're still going to have a lot of really hardcore systems engineering where you need to get from the 1 to N and you need to hire very different kinds of people. And to that, I think there's very good historical example, like Facebook as well. I mean, they got
PHP.
they got away with PHP, which personally is a terrible language.
Yeah.
Maybe I get flamed, but
Damn, shots fired.
I think it's a bad language.
I'm with you. I never liked it. Sorry, guys.
It was very...
I kind of like PHP. PHP was like my first main backend language for web dev. And it enabled it enabled you to build an app quickly and get it out the door, and the feedback with building PHP code and seeing it on the page and building a website was quick. And I felt like it was fairly simple. I'm surprised people like this that are really product oriented don't like PHP.
Very bad, but you could ship things very quickly. But at some point, it became such a big bottleneck for them to ship features that they had to hire the hardcore system people to build a custom compiler, hip hop.
Yeah.
That it would run.
Were we talking about PHP a long time ago? I think so.
and fast on bare metal because it's just too expensive to replace all the code.
Yeah.
And that kind of people that did that are not the vibe code people, are sort of this hardcore systems people that, based on our survey, current tools are not good at that low level system.
I would like them to elaborate on what they see as like systems people.
Systems engineering.
Harj, I'm not sure everybody who's listening knows what triple byte is, but it's actually very relevant. Do you want to just describe for everybody what?
Yeah, Triple Byte was the company I
was?
started in 2015, and we were essentially building a technical assessment for engineers. Like our goal was, how can you use software to automate evaluating software engineers? And the way we did it was pre all these code gen models, which is we built all of our own custom software to interview engineers, have humans interview engineers, and then essentially just like label the data like in every...
and interview them by like asking them to write code. These are highly technical interviews.
Yeah, it was a high tech. Yes, like it was ask them to write code. We did actually include algorithmic problems.
And is it true that you and your co-founders have done more technical interviews than any other people on the planet?
I think so. Like in terms of just like pure hours, because that was just like the early days of it were like all day, every day, just
like
interviewing
thousands,
people. Yes.
thousands and thousands of them, right?
And then we scaled up and we had like a team of about like 100 engineers contracted, just like that we would pay per interview completed.
And so you're exactly the right person to ask this question. You've literally spent more time thinking about this than anyone else on the planet. If you were starting Triple Byte again today and you had to design like new technical assessments for engineers, what would you have them do?
The big takeaway I had with Triple Byte and the screen in particular is just people want different things. And so you kind of need to know up front like what exactly it is that you're evaluating for, and then design your technical screen around that. It's kind of what I'm getting at with where Stripe and Gusto and these companies just knew that they didn't care if someone had fundamental CS knowledge. So it didn't make sense to screen them on that. Like they wanted to screen for the thing they were actually going to do in their job. And then our product was more trying to screen for everything, trying to get a taste of everything companies might want, and then figure out what someone's max skill was, and then send the people with the max skill to the companies that would value that max skill. And in today's world, I think I would actually have a screen that at least accounted for just how well people knew how to use these tools. Like, and so again, it's maybe contradicting what I'm saying earlier, but it might be the case of maybe how quickly you can code and you can build product is actually something to explicitly screen on, just set the bar much higher.
You probably have to ask different questions, because I'll bet if you go back to the original Triple Byte assessment, I'll bet a lot of those questions you could literally just copy and paste the question into ChatGPT and it would spit out a perfect answer.
Yeah.
In which case you're not really proving that much competence if you're just copy. Like the questions probably have to be like 100 times harder.
I mean, this gets to the deepest stuff, right? No, not necessarily, because if you have someone else it depends on like what conditions you're going to put on the screen, which I think is interesting. So I don't know, classic question was like build tic-tac-toe. Yes, of course, if you do that unsupervised and you just let someone like come back with their tic-tac-toe solution, that's going to take like 2 seconds, right? If you want to watch them code it and force them to not use an LLM,
I guess that's a question. Do you force them to code it without an LLM? Like the old questions, or do you let them use an LLM and now you need new questions because the old ones became trivial?
You can't. You have to separate that. You need to test for knowledge around the tools without LLMs, and then if you really are going this direction, you want to test, now that you know they have a foundation, I think we can trust that if they have that foundation, they're probably going to be able to use LLMs more effectively and use them in a way where it actually does significantly increase their productivity. Given that they're able to revise, give feedback to the LLMs, and give very explicit feedback to help debug some of the shitty code that the LLMs produces. But I think you have to eliminate LLMs entirely from the assessment initially. You have to see if they're actually a good software engineer. I don't think you should be assessing speed in the same interview as you're assessing if they know the tools, if they know how to code. that has to be separated.
I think is what everyone hiring software engineers right now should be thinking about and trying to figure out. Yeah, I'm not sure I know what the correct answer is to that. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think there's going to be, probably you're going to test for different things because I also did a lot of engineering hiring. I think one key skill that's going to, I think, remain that's constant. I do think skills of reading code and debugging are maxim. It's like you have to have the taste and enough training to know that the LLM is spitting bad stuff or good stuff. So like bad code or good. And I think you can see it clearly sometimes if a candidate is using the tools and there's actually a reasonable solution that the LLM outputs, and then the candidate is like, oh, this is actually bad. That is a sign. So I think knowing kind of more the higher level thinking to know what is good versus bad. In order to do good vibe coding, you still need to have the taste and you still need that kind of classical train, maybe not necessarily classical train, but enough knowledge to judge what's good versus bad. And you only become good with enough practice. I think that will be one that will be
So she's right. So at least from what I've seen, a lot of people who don't really care to keep their coding skills fresh, or they never really got good with coding, that are doing vibe coding, I see them being a lot more frustrated. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but I don't think it produces good code overall. When it keeps rewriting and rewriting, and when we get to a point where it is building upon itself, that's going to be a little bit different. But right now, you need a lot of rewrites. And I see people not vibing. They're just getting frustrated with it. And so essentially you need kind of a software engineer that likes coding enough to get good at software engineering to be able to use LLMs in a way where they can properly assess things and give explicit feedback, to eventually kind of hone the feature app that they're trying to build. But those software engineers, if you've enjoyed coding that much already, outsourcing that enjoyment to an LLM, I think in the short term, maybe you're going to get some cheap dopamine hits, but I think you're going to get kind of burned out and not enjoy coding in general that much. Where I think in the long term, you're just going to hurt your enjoyment with it. So the people that you need to effectively use LLMs to do really good vibe coding are going to, they're going to be so good, and they're good because they enjoy coding, and they're not going to be the people that want to outsource everything to an LLM.
constant. That would be my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just code, it's sort of like more like code review as the interview versus like actually like producing code.
Yeah, I mean, you could have some form of system design. You want to know how good they can put a product out there. So then it's testing for taste. So we're going to test for debugging and then taste. But then how do you get...
Define taste more. Because we're using it to describe like kind of like market fit, product, but also taste for like what's being generated, and if the implementation being generated through LLMs is like you kind of have a gut feeling that it's good or it needs revised. I feel like she's using taste pretty loosely. So what does she mean by that?
I guess this is a question going to these kids that you have that we call it AI coding natives.
Yeah.
How do you develop taste when you don't come from a classically trained world? Which would be interesting for next generation.
Well, you have
founders.
to, because if you don't, the startup dies, right? So let's say this founder, they go off, they have 95% written by AI. The proof is in a year out, 2 years out, they have 100 million users on that thing. Does it fall over or not? And then one of the things that's pretty clear is these systems, in the first realm, the first versions of reasoning models, they're not that good at debugging. So you actually would need to descend down into the depths of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And if you can't, then let's hope that they can
like
go
stuff,
find
right?
another architect who,
Yeah.
they're going to have to hire someone who can.
I think there's going to be a generation of software engineers that are like good enough, because it's so easy to retool there with all these code gen tools. Like the barrier to entry is so low. You're going to be good enough engineers. There's going to be tons of those. But to be exceptional, like the top 1%, I think you're going to need to get into deliberate practice. I mean, the analogy we're talking about is Malcolm Gladwell popularized this concept of 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert, which
There are a lot of aspiring developers who you might be able to label as good enough. How is that going? Are they getting hired?
came from this research from, what was his name?
Anders Ericsson.
Anderson Ericsson, right? Which it wasn't just, the research was very specific. It was about how do you find world-class violinists? And it wasn't about just putting the time, but deliberate practice. It's like hours that are actually planned and thought, and it's hard work. You could become an expert with less hours. So I think what's happening with now CodeGen tools is that it's very cheap to put in the hours because the output is just so quickly. You can get to good enough. But to become the best in the world and the best founder, you're going to need that deliberate practice to go into the details. And
So again, to become the best founder, and I want to really emphasize this, what they're really talking about are entrepreneurs who are tech savvy, who might be software engineers or whatever, but their main purpose is to build products and just ship products. They don't really want to they only want to dive deep enough into coding, enough to be able to create their products. We're not talking about software engineers. It's kind of the equivalent of kind of just like what would you call it, like a script kiddie with cybersecurity stuff or hacker stuff. That's kind of the equivalent. And so they're going to be good enough to be able to create something on their own for their own company. But again, low code solutions have been a solution for this for a very long time. You could build prototypes and test that and get market fit and get pre-signups and stuff like that, and even get paid signups without actually building the product. There are a ton of strategies to be able to find that market fit without going deep into fleshing out all of your code for your application. Like a common thing that happens is like you try to get a prototype out where people can kind of play around with it, but it's a lot of dummy data. Like when you're presenting it or you're having like a demo feature, it's very isolated. It's not like a full application, but it feels like a full application. And a lot of times you're just not even hooking it up to a database. You're just serving up mock data. It's very bare bones and quickly scrapped together. Like this has always been a thing, but what they are talking about, because they're kind of like going back and forth between like real software engineers and people that just want to know enough code to like get some sort of application out. And I think that's an important distinction. Their focus is on founders who basically don't want to or don't have the funds to spend on software engineering to just push out a product. There are going to be a lot of companies who want to hire software engineers, but these are like very initial products where they don't really have a lot of money for software engineering. They're just trying to get a market fit. They've already had the solution. So I know some people are kind of like, they might fear that there are some founders who don't want to hire software engineers because they could just use LLMs to create something. But a lot of these people probably weren't going to hire software engineers because if they had this mindset, like they could have just used low-code solutions, and AI is just replacing low-code solutions, which they could have used to get that market fit. So I know they're talking about founders and specific types of founders that are very, very, very early on in their journey with finding that market fit.
And you're going to have to peel the onion and understand the systems and get to, again, to some extent, being classically trained. I mean, a good example is, maybe we go back to history, is like Picasso, one of the greatest painters. He was amazing at drawing lifelike pictures.
Which is not what he's famous for. Of course, when you imagine a Picasso, you imagine the opposite of that.
Yeah.
There's this famous sequence of drawings on how he got to an abstract bull. It starts from being lifelike to iterations until he gets to the essence, to kind of the abstract art that he's very well known for.
But he could only get to be the best in the world because he was actually a very good painter and classically trained and could draw super well. But that's not what he's known for. So I do think we'll see these two classes of engineers. You'll still have like a very fat class of like good enough. You need engineers for those. But the best in the world, the founders that become outliers, are going to need to put in the deliberate practice.
Yes and no. I mean, I think there are lots of really amazing examples of great systems level and world-class engineers who ended up being CEO and CEO of the biggest public companies in the world. I think of Max Levchin. I think of Toby Lutke from Shopify. I mean, these are people who just like actually that great. And the thing is, there are lots of other people who are not that great, but also still CEO or co-founders of companies. And then it kind of goes back to link up what we were saying earlier. It goes back to hiring.
I mean, I keep thinking about the Twitter analogy that you brought up, because I think it's a really interesting one. Like, if you compare Facebook and Twitter, in both cases, they went very quickly from 0 to 1 in sort of scrappy, move fast, break things way. Facebook was able to solve the scaling technical challenges in a pretty impressive way. I think most people would agree.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg was by far way more technical and way more in the weeds, probably.
Maybe, but I don't know. Like,
I think Twitter scalability challenges were also harder based on the usage patterns. Like, the thing about the usage of Facebook is that it grows, it's pretty smooth throughout the day. Like, people just use it all the time. The problem with Twitter is that the usage is incredibly spiky. You get like a Super Bowl or like a, like a world event, and all of a sudden you have like 10 times as much usage. The way the fan out of the feed works is, I think, like fundamentally a very difficult computer science problem.
Okay, that's fair.
Though I also think that they were like really hamstrung by their tools. Do you remember using this terrible queue system called Starling? Like,
absolutely.
I used it because I thought, oh, Twitter's so much bigger than us. They're so smart. They wouldn't use something that's crap. No, they totally use crap. And then I use crap and I couldn't make it work. It was like, it was dropping jobs on the floor. Like, it's just like all these crazy bugs happened. And then I was like, finally, I was like, I'm not using that anymore. I have to switch to RabbitMQ or whatever the heck the actually correct thing to use was.
Yeah, and like Ruby is an incredibly slow language, even like 10x slower than PHP, which was already too slow.
So I don't know. I mean, basically, you should be so lucky to get to one.
Yeah. Is there an advantage for a technical founder to be classically trained and be a really deep systems thinker?
Well, I mean, a Toby or a Max Levchin is not going to get bullshitted by people.
I'll tell you from Stripe is the same.
I mean, I'll tell you a crazy story. When I was at Palantir, I sort of burnt out there after a couple of years after I designed the logo. And then I actually, between that and going to start my YC startup, I spent 6 months as a interaction designer. And it was this like terrible venture-backed company that ended up going in the ground. And it was like credit card software. It was the worst. I spent 6 months building like basically just interaction designs, which was really fun. That's what allowed me to work on my startup in my spare time, because I had a lot of spare time. But I remember designing, this faceted search thing for like rental cars or something like that. And then I go into my meeting with my dev manager and engineers who were going to implement it. And they were like, oh yeah, it can't be done. We can't do it that way. And I was like, what are you talking about? Just make the indexes like this. And they were like, whoa, what do you mean? Like, and then they looked up my resume.
Hear that going, that from the interaction designer.
Yeah, basically, they're like, how did you know that? And I was like, you fucking lied to me. And that's the thing, like, what founders and like, when you're hiring people, that was like the wildest thing to me. But it was like sort of the ultimate lesson where it's like when you're in the workplace, you sort of assume that the people you bring on, like, they're not going to lie. They're not lazy. Like, we're all for the goal and the mission, right? And it's like, no, like people who you hire, like they totally will lie to you if you cannot tell that they're lying. And then the worst part is like, you kind of have to
it feels so cringe having to like convince the manager that you love their product when you don't. Especially when it's the most boring product that you can come up with. And I'm sure, a lot of newer developers, like my audience is mainly newer developers. I know you probably feel like you're kind of faking it a little bit. And you kind of have to. You don't lie, but you look up their product a little bit and you find a few less cringy, less boring, less enterprisey things to kind of find interesting, right? And you latch onto those. And that's... But I do think some, especially like founders and CEOs, are so in the weeds of their product, they have built it. It's their solution, and they drink their own Kool-Aid for so long, where I think there's a disconnect with this expectation of like expecting your software engineers to like really care about the product, even like 50% of the amount that you do. I still think it's important to really try to apply for companies where you do care about the product. I think there's a higher chance of longevity, which is going to mean further growth, and just it looks better staying at a company for a long time and solving harder and harder problems over time and taking more ownership of the company and like moving to a more senior role. It looks better as a software engineer. So I highly recommend you really try to get in at like some of your favorite tools, even if it's dev tools or favorite web-based tools. Like if you're trying to become a web developer, apply at that company, reach out. Even if they don't have open positions, you reaching out when they don't have an open position and saying why that you're interested, like reaching out on LinkedIn to the recruiters, or, you know, like making friends with the software engineering team. That goes a long way. They remember people like you. Not always, but a lot of times they do, because they want to hire people that like really love the product, because again, it's going to be easier to keep that person there. It's going to be easier to keep that person motivated when they care about the features that they're building. That's the thing. But again, I do think some CEOs and founders are a little bit disconnected with their expectations of what software engineers, like how much software engineers need to care about their product.
Call them on it. Like, you know, sometimes you have workplace cultures that are so polite that people are like, oh, like, I'm going to let that pass, and then I'm going to talk shit about them behind their back. And it's no, you should fire them.
The AI agents, incidentally, will do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
They will absolutely, like, the AI agents will bullshit you just like a human employee will if you don't, if you're not technical enough to, like, call them out on their bullshit and be like, like, no, like, you do.
That's the problem. That's the one problem with using LLMs as a mentor and having it like teach you stuff. You don't really know what you don't know, and LLMs will bullshit you. And you have to test their output. You have to test things. Go into your code editor, execute your code, test things, right? Because it might bullshit you. It might hallucinate. Just keep that in mind.
Didn't make the change that I asked you for. It goes back to your point about like why being classically trained is still helpful. Like you have to be able to call out all the people working for you, whether they're human or not. Being technical enough to be able to do that is a superpower.
So just to wrap up, basically what's going on with all these tools giving superpowers to the best engineers and making the bad engineers also worse is, this is a quote from the founder of TrainLoop: how coding has changed 6 to 1 month ago, 10x speed up. Now, 1 month ago, 100x speed up. Now it's exponential acceleration.
It sort of crept up on us, actually.
Yeah, it was like somebody dropped some like giant beanstalk seeds at night. We woke up in the morning and there it was like, whoa,
what's going on? So,
never mind. We have a minute and a half to finish up. We'll just let them continue talking.
I mean, I think our sense right now is this isn't a fad. This isn't going away. This is actually the dominant way to code. And if you're not doing it, like, you might just be left behind. This is just here to stay. And, you know, vibe coding is not a fad. It's time to accelerate. So with that, we'll see you guys for the next Light Cone.
Oh, that ending was so cringe. It's okay. I really was trying to be charitable, but okay, we're just gonna go full cam. Yeah, I'll just stay like this. I don't think I set up the proper scene. That's fine. We'll just show the hosts and the credits, and feel free to check them out. I actually watch a lot of Y Combinator's videos. I'm going to give a little bit of my thoughts at the end, and then we'll wrap it up with that. I think those founders are very, very intelligent. Or I guess I don't even know who they are. Honestly, I don't know if they're staff of Y Combinator, if they are investors who are also host of the podcast that Y Combinator has started. I don't know. But I do find in terms of like building out a SaaS product and trying to get better in that realm, Y Combinator is really good. They give good advice. This idea, though, man, why'd they end with that? Like, the video was actually pretty good. And I found, where do I want to start with this? I found that I cringed a lot less than I thought I would. And I felt like they had quite a few nuanced takes that really showed this is pretty well thought out, and they're not just blindly pushing vibe coding as a future. But I do think they use specific terms, and sometimes they mix it a little bit, but they're really emphasizing founders. Vibe coding can be a thing for founders who basically probably have very low revenue, and they're just trying to push out code. It's kind of like a replacement for low-code solutions, which have existed already. These founders would have probably just built prototypes and used low-code solutions that have existed already. So I don't think this idea, because I know there's a bit of a fear that it's like replacing software engineers. I just don't see that here. And I think they were actually very charitable in having this blind allegiance for AI-generated code being a mistake. And that's the implication that I think they delivered. And if that's not what they were saying, that's how I interpreted it. But that you're going to need people who are actually good at what they do to basically, let's say AI O5, whatever model is going to be the next model that replaces software engineers or claims to be. I think we're always going to need good software engineers to be able to reel in things and redirect kind of the direction that chat history is going, and call out the AI for hallucinations. I think we're always going to need that. But you're not going to be a good software engineer, even if AI starts integrating into workflows. You're not going to be a good software engineer by heavily using AI generated code for years, right? You're just going to become a bad software engineer, and you're just now becoming dependent on AI generated code getting so large into your code base. And I think you're just going to lose track of it. You're going to create a nightmare of bugs that just creep up in your applications. You need good software engineers, like let's say even like 5 years down the road, where this really becomes a thing where Devin doesn't fall asleep after a few hours of trying to generate some JSON file. Devin knows the whole context of the code base, and it has that huge context window, and AI is able to be generated on very like low spec hardware where it becomes much cheaper. Let's say we're in that scenario. You still you still need good software engineers that have spent a significant amount of time coding on their own without dependence to be able to guide that. Just this idea that people think that we can solely rely on AI generated code now, there are people that think that now, is just crazy. And the only reason you think that is because you're a bad software engineer and you're not able to spot these hallucinations. If you are a good software engineer and you've used AI models extensively for generated code to see what it can do, you realize how shitty it actually is. I think people just want it to be true. They want AI to replace software engineering, and I want to speak to that. I am a terrible graphic designer. I don't have money to hire a graphic designer right now. I would love AI to generate my designs. I would love it to generate my web designs, right? And I can give it the users that are going to be using it and give it a lot of context. I want it to generate that. I totally get the appeal of people who aren't good developers that just want to outsource it. I totally get that. And I think this is a tool for indie hackers. I don't think it's that good for indie hackers right now, but I do think it's a tool for indie hackers. And those are the types of people, and just entrepreneurs, those are the types of people that want vibe coding to be great. Right now, it's not even great for them. It just sucks. It just does. And 2 to 3 years down the road, it's probably going to be much better. This idea, though, it's accelerating past 6 months, 10x engineers. And then last month, 100x. I don't think that is true for all tasks. I think you could probably find a task that it accelerates for you at lightning speed, But that doesn't apply to your whole job. That doesn't apply to you being a software engineer where now your tasks they get done 100 times faster because of LLMs. Like you are 100x software engineer. That is not a thing. I don't agree with that. There are certain tasks that it can accelerate quite a bit, but those tasks are limited, and it's still, you need to be good enough to be able to call out hallucinations and redirect as needed. I think this is more hopium than anything among people who don't want to code anymore. And I have a feeling some of those people are probably really good software engineers or were in the past with the way that they were talking. I could be wrong about that as well. It sounds like maybe they were developers a long ass time ago for talking about like PHP being slow. I like slow for what kind of app they were building. I would have to dig into their history. But PHP's gotten pretty fast, and I don't think they probably touched PHP in a very long time. So, PHP fans, feel free to shit on this video. I totally get it. Not my video, their video. But I get the appeal to it. I do think it's hopium, and I think they're intermingling this idea of like replacing software engineers in general. I actually think they were pretty charitable and nuanced with it, but I think the vibe coding in general, let's talk outside this video. I think a lot of the people like that are really pushing vibe coding on Twitter, I think that they just are really bad software engineers who don't care to be good. Like you get this like strong messaging and sometimes with a ton of likes because they have a large audience and it feels like there's authority behind what they're saying. And you get this volume of tweets saying vibe coding is the future. And I look at those tweets and I kind of just cringe and I move on. But if, a newer developer looks at those tweets and they're like, well, what is the point of learning to code? Like if people are just using LLMs to create the code, it's like, you just don't know any better. They're misleading you, probably because they're really bad software engineers and they don't realize how shitty and unscalable their code actually is going to be. But you just get a lot of large audience, loud people who push vibe coding as the future. And then you go into live streams of these people that are doing this and they're pushing this message on Twitter, how amazing this experience is. And you watch them live stream their process and they're miserable towards the end. Like AI is so frustrating with vibe coding. It will completely rewrite things. And you had something that was kind of working, but it had these bugs that made it kind of unplayable. And then it rewrites the application. And you just, they hate it now. And it's like, now they're trying to get back to an older revision and they're having difficulty doing that. Now they just have a shittier product. You're literally just gambling. You're like, you're putting in a few dollars and hoping to get something tangible. And then it's kind of tangible. It's kind of just like when, in Diablo, if I haven't played Diablo in a while, so I'm probably going to word this poorly, but in Diablo, I think you're able to re-roll gear or you're able to re-roll gems where like, let's even say like you were enchanting your gear. You're able to re-roll some of the stats on it and your stat was actually kind of good. But you just keep dumping gold into it. You dump gold into it over and over and over to try to get the main stat that you want. And then you realize you've dumped half of your gold into it and you haven't gotten that stat. And now a lot of the stats that are being given to you are way worse than your original stat. And you're like, what the fuck? Why did I gamble that? That is vibe coding. That is the experience of vibe coding from what I've seen. So I think it's a hyperbolic title. Vibe coding is the future. I think their conversation was more nuanced where I think they kind of believed that, but were pretty damn far off from it. But I would have liked them to really go into some of the frustrations with vibe coding, because this is where I see, videos where they're just detached from the reality when you actually watch people try to do vibe coding. It's not the future, not the near future anyways. And this comes from a lot of people who don't care to dive deeper into software engineering, and they might not even like it. There's a subset of people like this that might do vibe coding and might eventually produce something tangible, and then get a software engineer or themselves to really dive deep into the code to flush out something that is manageable, that's readable, that's scalable. But I think it's just overhyped. I think it's really overhyped. I wouldn't give it much attention. So I don't think it's replacing software engineers. AI isn't replacing software engineers anytime soon. And that's what I hear from a lot of vibe coding people. It's just not. That's not the reality. So see this for what it is. The title is a bit hyperbolic. Continue watching conversations about this if you really want to. But again, this is a subset of people. Just like I am someone who is not going to become a good designer, I'm going to use AI. I was never going to hire a designer. I'm going to use AI to help me generate a little bit of a better high fidelity mockup eventually. I think that's fantastic for me. I was never going to hire a designer. This isn't replacing any good designers out there. I'm not like me using AI isn't replacing any good graphics designers out there. So that's how I would see it. There's just a subset of people where this will benefit, and it's probably not going to benefit those people as much as they think it is. That's my take on this. Let me know what you thought. Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Is vibe coding our future?